And it's just, have we any apologies?
Yes, Convener. We have apologies from Councillor Goldsack and also from Councillor Quigley, with Councillor Quigley being substituted by Councillor Wharton.
Right. Now, the next item is any declarations of interest. I think Mrs. Councillor Gourley has her hand up. Mary, did you have a declaration of interest?
No, sorry.
Sorry, okay. Anyone else? Okay, if we can then go on to item 2 on the agenda, which I'm glad to say that we have some young people with us today. Would that be correct, June? It's nice that this report has been launched. You've probably seen it. And the fact that our youth work has done so much over this crisis has been recognised by the council leader actually doing the forward for it, and a wonderful cartoon of him it is too. Do we have the person who did the cartoons here, June? No?
No, unfortunately, no. We have the other member of the Scottish Youth Parliament here today, Claire, and we also have Ellie with us. If you want me to kind of go on and introduce them, Convener, I'll do that. That
would be great if you would do that, June, but it's, as we couldn't have them the last time, they can start us off this time. That's brilliant. Great, June.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, committee. The committee members will recall at the previous meeting there was the approval of the North Lanarkshire Youth Work and Renewal Plan. This plan was launched on Friday the 9th of October via all social media outlets, shared with all our CLD partners and shared with all our lead professionals. Immediate feedback has been positive from all partners and young people who were part of the co-production of the plan. With regards to the content of the action plan, but as Convener has just mentioned, such positive feedback with regards to the graphics and the images that were created from Victoria Orkla, who is the member of the Scottish Youth Parliament for Motherwell and Wishaw, who has also, I'm delighted to say, just recently been elected last weekend to the Board of Trustees on the Scottish Youth Parliament as well. I would also like to say, in addition to the content of the plan, Liz Fergus and I have been local assessors on the National Youth Work and Education Recovery Fund. And it was encouraging that Liz and I both seen the North Lanarkshire Youth Work Plan cited in the applications from some of our local community-based partners, which just goes to show the immediate impact that that has had. Today marks the beginning of National Youth Work Week, with themes such as resilience and reimagined. And today at committee we have Claire McVeigh, who's the member of Scottish Youth Parliament for Motherwell and Wishaw, and we have Ellie Murphy, who is a senior volunteer youth leader in the Motherwell locality team. Both are joining us via their schools, and they're here today supported by Laura McFarlane and Gillian McCairn, both CLD youth workers in the Motherwell locality. In addition to the National Youth Work Plan, in addition to the North Lanarkshire Youth Work Plan, Community Learning Development Youth Work has a very good reputation in working with our national youth work organisations. A few years ago, Coatbridge Youth Work Team were the pilot for the National Youth Work Outcomes. And over the past few months, myself and Laura has been part of a national working group looking at youth work and skills framework. And we're hopeful that we have a video to show you today on the contribution from North Lanarkshire to that National Skills Framework case studies. But it was working on Friday when Richard and I tested this out. However, the gremlin seems to be in this morning and we'll try our best to make that work. However, in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Gillian and Laura, who's going to introduce the young people and hopefully the video. So over to Gillian and Laura.
Hi, I don't know if Laura's there. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, so I'm here with Ellie. It was myself and Laura's job to prep the young people in the video with their the skills that they have learned and developed throughout the youth work that they've been involved in. I'm going to pass you on to Ellie. She'll tell you a bit about her journey. She did this in the video. Hopefully you'll get to see it, but she'll tell you a bit more about what she's done and what she's learned with us.
Hi, I'm Ellie and I've been involved with youth work for over 9 years now. I started out on my North Lanarkshire challenge when I was 8. Through youth work I've gained a lot of skills such as resilience and communication, and it's really helped me in school and through my journey through my life. So through that gained in youth work, I've been able to attend presentations, I've been able to teach classes in my own free time, while also being able to help other young people through awards they've done, such as Duke of Edinburgh, which I'm a huge part of. I'm hopefully starting my gold this year. Yeah, youth work's been great. It's had a huge influence on my life, and I genuinely wouldn't trade it for the world. And Gillian's great as well.
I'm not sure if Laura's there. Can you see her?
I can't see it on the name.
I think they've had some issues in the ladies' high school with the Wi-Fi.
Laura was on earlier, but she seems to have disappeared.
Hi.
It was.
Hi, can you hear me now? There she's there.
Yes, yes, Laura.
We are outside in the playground. We had some serious issues. I think we need to get the Wi-Fi sorted in schools.
Okay, does Claire want to add anything to what Ellie's just said, and then we can try and show the video, Laura?
Sorry, we missed everything that Ellie said. I'm just here.
We missed the start of it.
Claire, just say what you were going to say.
So through youth work, I gained many skills. I started originally with like the youth forum. Through that, I gained communication and different like teamwork skills, and then I moved on to be a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament. And through that, I gained skills, confidence, and decision making. To help like represent the views of our constituencies. So therefore I would have to have gained that skill in order to do so.
Okay, as you can see, we're trying our best to make sure that young people are included in a safe way, and that's why we thought this video would be really good. I'm going to try and share it, convener, if that's all right. If I can just ask people just to give me 30 seconds to 1 minute before we get this working for you, okay? Is that working?
Sort of moving, June, but no sound.
Through you, convener June, I've posted in the chat bar how you can share your audio as well from the computer, which might help get you the sound on the video.
You have, Councillor London, thank you.
This is a shame. It was working absolutely fine on Friday when we tested this. Okay. Pop-up also dropped down, just says optimize. I can't see that. Oh, wait a minute. Optimize for motion and video.
Duke of Edinburgh Award.
It's a fabulous award where you do a volunteering placement, a physical placement and a skills placement, and you also go out on your expedition.
She felt that the expedition really helped her get up and get on with things.
I developed my leadership skills, I developed resilience with working with the kids.
Having that night of camping with us and think about what they'd done that day and to get their thoughts together, and then getting up next day, picking themselves up and getting going even when they were tired.
Resilience is key to doing your Duke of Edinburgh. Once you've learned that and once you've figured out your limits and what you can push yourself to, it really makes the whole experience a lot easier.
So Chloe has came through our junior youth groups. The first project I worked on her with was a summer project, which 8, and we actually went camping, and she had never had anything like that, never had an experience like that before. She came through it and really excelled in the outdoor environment.
One of the main skills I've learned through youth work is organisation and being able to plan my full week around all the different stuff I have to do. Through that I was also able to do a Platinum Youth Achievement Award, which is sort of like a reflection on volunteering, using the Summer Hub as my placement.
She's actually doing our Young Leader Award with me just now, and she's going to be a Duke of Edinburgh ambassador within her school. So she has the leadership quality to lead Duke of Edinburgh now, and because of her enthusiasm for the award, she's a perfect candidate to sell the award to other young people. Claire volunteered to stand as an MSYP when she was 14. At the time, she was really young for standing. The other candidates were a lot older and had a lot more experience, but she felt that she could make a difference within her community.
I wasn't very confident before I started youth work, but through my journey in youth work, it's gave me huge confidence. I've been able to speak in front of huge crowds, but if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have built up the confidence to even be able to run as MSYP, never mind gain the role of an actual MSYP. But I would really thankful for youth work for gaining confidence.
Now she has flourished into an MSYP who's really excelling, and she is campaigning and fighting for the rights of young people within her community. Sky has been on placement with us for the past year. She's taking part in her community development degree from Glasgow University.
Through youth work, I've learned to build and maintain positive relationships, not only with the young people that I work with in groups, but also with the people that help facilitate the groups. I feel like I've built a really good relationship and I can speak to them.
We have seen a real change in Sky since she started. She's really flourished and her confidence has built. She was given the opportunity to run our youth work room, and it was the first time she was really given an opportunity to run her own project. Being a youth worker is giving young people experiences that they would never normally get a chance to have. It's also about getting them outside their comfort zone and trying new things.
Youth work's important because it lets you develop your character and it lets you develop who you are as a person. It gives you an outlet to be able to express yourself that you might not be able to do in school. You'll meet people that have similar interests to you. Also, youth groups let you develop your interests and your beliefs as well, and it can also raise awareness to you the issues that you might not have known about. We would often talk about different challenges that faces in life, so I think the youth work's crucial in making sure that kids develop their teamwork, their leadership, but also their social skills and their own character as well and their own development.
As a youth worker, we're always here to talk to young people, and throughout the current situation we've been available, even though we've not been able to meet our groups in person. We've been online, we've had various online meetings with our young people, so it's about being available to the young people when they need it.
They help you understand things that you might not, they give you lots of experience, they help you through certain awards, certain opportunities such as MSYP and SYP. I wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for the opportunities that they've opened you towards. They kind of just help you through awards, support you in any support that you may need, and they're always there for that someone that you might have to talk to, and it's maintained great friendships and everything.
So it's giving them the skills to go out and face real life.
Thank you. I hope that worked for everybody. Good.
That's wonderful, June, and I'm sure everyone would like. I see that Councillor Fotheringham's put up a comment saying well done, and I think we all feel that way. We missed them not being at the previous meeting, and it is so good to see the work that they are doing, and they're great ambassadors for North Lanarkshire Council, as are all our youth workers. So I would like to
Absolutely.
thank you all for all your work, and also the young people for what they've been doing over this recent, seems forever.
I know.
Thanks to them all.
Thank you. So just to say, that video will now be part of an example of skills developed in youth work on the National Youth Link website, which will be launched in the next few weeks and months. So delighted that North Lanarkshire features once again in the sector leading service that we are. And again, thank you to our young people and staff for coming along today. I don't know if there's any other comments and questions for the young people before they have to get back to their subject areas.
Anyone, any questions other than just to thank them for all their great work? I think the chat bar says it all. Everyone's praising them. And can only thank yourself and Liz for all the work that you do, and certainly put North Lanarkshire in the forefront of everything. Well done.
Thank you.
Right. As there are no questions for the young people, any questions were on the last meeting, can we now go to the next item, which is item 3, and that's the campuses, and that would be Matt.
Okay, thanks, convener. Good morning. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on previously approved projects in relation to the campuses board, and for one particular project to seek approval for the heritage work that's been proposed at the Carrick Stone to be added to the list of commended projects. It's also to advise that the current net balance of funds after settling of company debts and liabilities, which will transfer to the council for subsequent allocation for projects in the Cumbernauld area. And note that projects approved by this committee and in the future will not require any further ratification at the community board as part of the process, will be assessed by the community partnership team through the process previously detailed to committee, and to advise committee that work is ongoing to formalise the dissolution of the board and transfer the remaining balance of funds to the council. Just to further advise that the work is ongoing to deliver workshops for elected members and community groups in relation to the application process, which was approved at a previous Community Empowerment Committee and will be implemented following dissolution. Work is also ongoing with corporate communications to develop a positive communications approach, which through a video, press release and wide use of social media will highlight and showcase the positive work undertaken by the campuses board over the last years and the projects delivered, but will also seek further cooperation of the community groups in Cumbernauld, ensuring the investment of the remaining funds has a positive impact of the communities in Cumbernauld. Therefore, committee are asked to note the update on the approved projects, including the inclusion of Carrick Stone, and authorise legal and democratic solutions to prepare the necessary resolutions and undertake all other due diligence as required to ensure the effective and timely transfer on and subsequent dissolution of the Campuses Centre Cumbernauld Limited, with any such resolutions to be executed by a legal manager within legal and democratic solutions. That's that report, convener.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt. Sorry, it hadn't unmuted straight away there. Any questions for Matt, or don't see any on the chat bar? So if we can go directly to approval, do we approve the recommendations of this item? Yep. People are nodding, so I'll take that as agreed. Okay, thank you. If we can now go to item number 4, which is the implementation of community boards, and it is Lizanne and Matt who's going first.
I'll pick up on the opening remarks, convener. Good morning, everyone. Given the concerns raised at the previous committee, the report's been brought forward this morning to ensure that members are not only cited but involved in the important community board work going forward, and as we develop our approach with you with communities. I would like to draw your attention particularly to section 2.10 report, where we have set out the response to the amendment that was approved at the last Community Empowerment Committee. As some members will be aware, much of the content of this report has already been through the Policy and Strategy Committee during the last cycle, given the importance of ensuring that the boards get off to the best possible start. As you're all aware, there were some issues around configuration, and that will take you through the outcome of consultation carried out in that regard. What Matt will also give you some more information on is the members' briefing sessions that were held just last week, which again we sought to pick up on, making sure members were fully involved in the process and understanding the process that we undertook during lockdown in particular, that led to the first round of meetings. We also picked up on the development of the 9 LOIPs, local outcome improvement plans, that members had also asked to be updated on. But I'll hand over to Matt, if that's okay, convener, just to take you through the report. Thank you.
Okay, Matt, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, convener. Thanks, Lisanne. As Lisanne said, this report provides a progress update on the implementation of the 9 community boards established as part of the governance arrangements to ensure the plan for North Lanarkshire's agreed engagement with communities model is taken forward. Following on from the initial meetings, the report also provides an overview of some of the early examples of local communities actively seeking to co-produce and influence work and priorities of the boards. The report also refers to feedback received from those who attended the initial community board meetings. Further intent behind the report is to ensure that the Community Empowerment Committee is kept informed as to how the boards are shaping up following the initial meetings in August and September, particularly in terms of community representation, which is obviously a key enabler in all important ongoing direction and development of the boards and their standing within local communities. The boards support community participation and provide a single coordinated approach to governance for local communities, reflecting statutory and regulatory requirements, and operate in a manner consistent with influencing and delivering the one plan outcomes at a local level. This will be achieved through the development of local outcome improvement plans for each of the 9 areas, ensuring a partnership focus for supporting service design, delivery and community action, reflecting both the ambitions within the plan for North Lanarkshire and the priorities and circumstances of individual areas. There was a number of issues that were raised in terms of the feedback and a number of key ideas and improvements to take things forward, which included wider representation from community organisations, discussions, the focus of each area community organisations and what they would like to see improve within their areas, through, particularly through the local outcome improvement plans, continuing to operate in a manner that is mutually respectful, and looking for some information and tips and training available for use of WebEx and other online tools. This is some of the things that were raised. These issues will be addressed in conjunction with all board members going forward. As members are aware, some clear issues and concerns were identified by a number of community organisations prior to the staging of the first board meetings, and in terms of the decision making around the underpinning and the formation of the structure of the boards in the Coatbridge and the Northern Corridor area. In response to that, a specific consultation exercise, as you're aware, was undertaken, facilitated through our partners in Voluntary Action North Lanarkshire, to explore concerns and provide the 2 community board areas with an opportunity to feedback on the initial arrangements for the board and put forward their opinions in terms of future operating arrangements. The outcome of this was that Ward 6 returned to the Northern Corridor Community Board. This outcome was reported to Policy and Strategy earlier in the month, and changes approved there will take immediate effect. There are also ongoing plans to establish an evaluation framework for the community boards, with reports provided on a quarterly basis to this committee on progress on the key deliverables identified via the framework, which will also encompass wider locality planning outcomes. Finally, just in relation to the member briefings that took place last week, these took place, and we're quite happy that over 20 elected members took up the opportunity to attend the members' briefings over 3 days. and we had input in relation to the community board's local outcome improvement plans, and these were shared widely and have been subsequently shared with all elected members in terms of the briefing that was given at that meeting. That's been shared out. So convener, committee is asked to agree the recommendations contained within the report. Of course, happy to take any questions at this point.
Well, at present I only have Councillor Linden, so Councillor Linden, if you can.
Convener,
Chair, I think Councillor Gallagher.
Councillor Gallagher. It's Councillor Linden was right below you. Sorry, Councillor Gallagher first.
Thanks very much, convener, and thank you very much, Councillor Linden, as well, for letting me come in first there. It's on 1.1.4 and also Appendix 2. I mean, I am pleased to see that the meetings have been moved back to 6:30 because it was a concern of mine, excuse me, that not many people could actually attend because of the initial start dates, either at 10:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's just to seek the guarantee from officers that that would be the format moving forward, because realistically it's a community board and we want to make sure that we can get as many people in attendance as possible.
Yep.
I come in on that, convener, if that's okay. Councillor Gallagher, yes, absolutely. The intention is to obviously to listen to the feedback from local communities, and that's certainly the majority of feedback took us towards the evening meetings. But I think ultimately, I think it's going to be up to the individual community boards to determine how they take these things forward. And if that's they wanted to look at alternatives to that, then individually we're not going to be prescriptive in relation in that regard, and it's up to boards. But certainly that's the position at the moment, and we don't see that changing unless a community board themselves want to do something differently.
Your second question, Councillor Gallagher, is that it?
No, that's it, convener. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Gallagher. Councillor Linden.
Thanks very much, convener. First section 1.4, the report around the participants at community boards. I wonder if officers could perhaps pass comment around the presence of community forums within the boards, and I recognise that the position across North Lanarkshire will be different, but I wondered what assessment officers had made around the role of community boards, community forums generally in terms of their participation on community boards, and whether or not there's an element of duplication in some of the work that community forums are doing in terms of the areas that they cover, the remit that they have, the access to resource, and whether there's an opportunity to have discussions with NHS Lanarkshire colleagues around disaggregating some of the work of community forums and implementing it as part of the community boards in a more strategic way. It seems to me there's an element of duplication there, and I think that that's something that we should be addressing. Another observation would be participants at community boards. Whilst youth groups are mentioned explicitly, I keep mentioning this at committee, I think it's important that the youth participation infrastructure is reflected within our decision-making forums, and I would like to see that in future either youth council representatives, youth forums or MSYPs are mentioned very specifically as a key stakeholder in our community board structures. Turning now to page 15, convener, there's a number of items that have been outlined at section 2.23, leading from page 13 to page 14, around work that has to be done, described by officers as not insurmountable, and I would agree with that. Notwithstanding that, however, I wonder what plans there are to address them, and how will committee be appraised of the action plan to address those specific points. Notwithstanding what's been said in the report, there's a number of areas there that aren't covered in terms of how we're going to get a resolution on some of those issues, and I'd like to see that coming forward either in a future paper or circulated to members in terms of the specifics. And then the final question for me, convener, relates as a general observation on participants, and the feedback from the community is around how we seek wider representation from the community on community boards. Obviously, there are a number of organisations involved in the community boards, but what we really need to see, and what I think was echoed at the community boards, was the participation not only of seldom heard voices, but I'm going to use the phrase ordinary people. It's not a phrase I like to use, but what we need is that the punter, as we've discussed, from Liberty Road and Bells Hill or from Moss End, that comes along because they're unhappy about an issue, and there was much critique and much reform of lapse in community matters required, but one of the strengths of it was the ability of local people to come along and participate. I mean, we saw that ourselves, convener, at Hollytown, where 100 folk turned up, gave us a hard time, and rightly so. And Councillor McNally was there as well. That was a great example of community participation. participation, and how do we ensure that those voices aren't missed in our community board structure, to ensure that there's that element of flexibility to make sure that local people are at the heart of everything we're doing. Thanks, Convener.
I think I can understand where you're coming from, Councillor Linden, in that final point, but it's a bit more difficult when it is the WebEx meetings. When we get back to our normal format, then it would be much easier for everyone to attend. Matt, can you answer those, please?
So I'll give some feedback on that. I think you're going through the point in order. In terms of the community boards, I'd see the community boards, we've had discussions with the umbrella organisation in relation to community boards about their input, and we're encouraging as wide a range of participation as possible. That we don't want the same people turning up all the time with the same agendas, for that matter, and we really encourage that to be as widened as much as we possibly can, and we're encouraging that through discussion with the community board umbrella organisation. And so I'll take on board your point in terms of further discussion with NHS in relation to that, to determine how we can take that forward more effectively to avoid any duplication of work in that regard. But it is very much about widening the representation of that we can have. If we have community boards or other community organisations, that it doesn't have to be the same people who are attending all the time to all of these meetings. We will encourage that changes, and that's work that's ongoing at the moment. Councillor Linden, to try and address that as effectively as we can. I certainly share your position in terms of youth groups, and we are working with colleagues, particularly June, in relation to that, to establish people from the young person, people in our communities, to be very important representatives on the community board. They've got a huge role to play, as we saw earlier today. The impact of young people in our local communities is huge, and it's something we need to tap into is more effectively, and we're absolutely committed to that. And there's absolutely no issue in terms of identifying MSYPs and representatives from groups as being specifically mentioned as being people who contribute to the boards. That's absolutely no issue at all, and we'll ensure that that's done and reference is made to that. How we perform in that, and generally in terms of the feedback on the list that's there, yes, there are a number of things there. We don't think they're insurmountable. I think there's things that we can do in partnership with others, including yourselves as elected members, to help support that going forward. The evaluation framework that we're currently developing just now will also allow us to say we're doing things right, whether we're hitting targets and whether we're getting the right people involved, whether we're dealing with key priorities for local areas, etc. And we'll continue to do that. And as part of our feedback to this committee in terms of the boards, we can include a note within that to say, well, how are we doing against the benchmarks that we're setting ourselves, and feed that back to yourselves, and hopefully get further feedback on that in the future. In terms of, again, seldom heard voice is something else. It's something we are, again, wholly committed to ensure that we get as many people from communities that aren't involved at the moment, getting people involved in this process, absolutely. And we have, as I say, we have designed a job remit, a role descriptor, for want of a better name, that we've sent out to all community groups who are interested in participating in this. And that's just, it's a draft at this stage. It's something we have pulled together, but we want to hear it's a two-way discussion. And if people in the local communities feel they could give more to the boards than we're putting within that document, then I'm absolutely more than happy to look at that and take that on board. We have also contacted a number of groups, have had discussions with our colleague Audrey Cameron in relation to some of the groups who meet the protected criteria in terms of equalities, and we've made direct contact with a number of groups to try and encourage participation in the boards as well, and that's also work that's ongoing at the moment. And again, hopefully we'll be able to report back positively in future cycles to this committee. In terms of wider engagement, as Councillor, as the convener mentioned, it's challenging at the moment. We're using WebEx in terms of getting as many people as we can. We are looking in discussions with IT in terms of this is going to go on for any length of time to encourage the wider use of WebEx, perhaps look at live streaming of the meetings going out to allow real-time input from other people that might cover the issues that you're raising. Councillor Linden, in terms of if somebody wants to raise a particular issue about an area, if we can get them online, and if necessary, provide support for people to do that, then that's them. We are in discussions at the moment to try and facilitate that for the future. But hopefully, all going well, in the next few months, we will be able to get back into our local communities, and we are committed to having these board meetings back in local communities, moving them about the wards, going to facilities that are wherever the local communities want us to have these meetings. If it's safe for us to do so, we will move towards that. But we're aware of these issues, and we are committed to try and make engagement as wide as possible. Hope that's answered your points, Councillor.
Is that okay, Councillor Linden?
Yes, thanks, Convener.
Yeah, I think we were unfortunate again. It was the timing of the meetings that prevented young people taking part the last time, because they were literally just back school, college, university, so couldn't get time out. 6:30 is a much better time for them. They'll be home by then, and that does enable them to be included much more. Thanks very much, Matt, for all your input there. Do we agree the proposals? Yep. Okay. Thank you. If we can now move on to item number 5, which is the Community Board's local development. And again, it's you, Matt. You're just lucky.
Thanks again, Convener. This report is an update on local development programme community boards projects which have received in principle approval at previous Community Matters locality partnership meetings which were held last year, and gives further updates on these projects. Again, just some background, these projects predominantly originated from local communities, and all projects were relevant were subject to design work, local consultation, ground investigations, etc. as required. It resulted in some projects not proceeding due to financial or site restrictions, or due to proposals being rejected by local community through consultation on designs. COVID-19 regulations caused a halt to a number of projects. However, since the previous relaxation of restrictions, most of the projects which have been able to proceed, and these are detailed within the report. The team were restricted to delivering only projects which we had contractual obligations, and work continues to maximise capital spend on these projects. The report also gives an update on the budgetary position for individual projects and advises regarding the current status. We also seek, in principle, as you'll see in the appendix, approval for several projects, and these will be maintained on a holding list and considered for future delivery, subject to consideration by the community boards and provision of adequate budget. In addition to those in the appendix, there's a couple of other ones that have came into us in the Airdrie area, one for Roy Yards Park for improvements to a play area, and one additional environmental improvements and fencing at Cairnhill Road. These came in after the proposals were sent out to yourselves. It's just what we're looking to do here is to recommend that the progress on the current local development programme in relation to deliverability, timelines, budgetary information and general status, as outlined in the appendix, is noted and approved where required, and also to note that the progress of projects will be reported to future meetings of this committee, and will give regular updates, as I said, to ongoing to elected members who have been directly involved in particular projects as required. That's all for that one, Convener.
Did you mean to come in twice, Councillor London, or was that an accident?
No, I just don't like typographical errors, Convener, so I was keeping to myself. I'm sure you'll appreciate that.
Right, okay, you seem to be the only person there. Okay, Councillor London.
Very much, Convener. Thank you, Matt, for the report. Matt, it relates to page 36 of the report. I've reviewed the committee papers for February 2020 and April 2020 in relation to the local development programme updates and revised programme, and the one that I have a question on doesn't appear in those, presumably because it's a potential programme for 2021-2023. But I noticed that there's £20,000 resource in terms of funding to support the development of potential works at View Park Gardens. Now, some members will be aware that there's ongoing processes, and we'll see that in a future report later on in the agenda around community asset transfer, and obviously View Park Gardens has been subject to budgetary considerations before in recent months and years. I just wondered, therefore, what the funding was for, what are the implications in terms of the CAP process, and perhaps we'll come on to that in a future report. I know that Leanne will no doubt have an answer on that, and where did it come from, because I don't recall it being discussed with members at the community board, so clarity on that would be helpful, Convener, and I may have a supplement that there is a possibility. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, Matt, can you
Sure.
agree with that one?
There's been a budget allocated to View Park Gardens for quite a while for that one over the last was a few committees ago that the funding. It's just that it's a general fund, Council of London, that was put in place to support any potential community activity. It's not against any specific project that's in there. It was there to allow us to potentially support any groups who were taking. Who were getting involved in the group who wanted to do any particular work in that site. It was prior to the community asset transfer process, the application coming in. So we would need to determine going forward. We couldn't give a specific answer to whether that would be allowed to support that at this stage, but there was funding to support potential work at that site for ongoing to community groups who were interested in doing a particular piece of work. But there has never been any money allocated from that budget to any particular work, and it's in there at the moment to be considered for future investment. But there hasn't been any funding allocated from that pot at this time.
Convener, I do have a supplementary.
Right, okay, Councillor London.
Might have a couple actually based on that answer, Matt. Can you follow up out with committee then to provide me with the report or the meeting at which that decision was taken in terms of how it first appeared on that resource and how, when was it discussed and who suggested it? You'll be aware that the £20,000 just so happens to be the annual running costs for that facility in terms of the council, in terms of the budgetary decision, and I'm sure will no doubt be aware that significant impact has been occurred at the site in terms of the turning off of the heating, the impact on the plant life, the fact there's been significant damage since the council decided no longer to fund it in a recent budget decision. So the fact that resource sits there unused whilst that facility, I guess experiences decline, would be of particular interest, particularly for those local groups who are obviously very keen and passionate, as are local people, to make sure it's invested in. So if you could follow up out with committee to understand a wee bit more around when that first appeared and how, that would be very much appreciated. Convener, thank you.
Right, forgot to unmute there. Right, thanks, Councillor London. No. Councillor Morgan, I see you there. Councillor Morgan.
Thanks, Convener. I think I wiped my invitation, but to put it back up, so you'll be glad about that. I came in there about 5 minutes ago, and I'm starting to think I've tuned into somebody's surgery. The questions that's been asked by the last speaker, is that not the type of question that should be asked between an elected member and the department? See, in this report, I thought the only comment would have been a congratulations to the many contractors, the many individuals that's been involved in delivering these. Some of these projects I have waited on for a couple of years. We've got to show some patience here, not just because of financial cuts.
Councillor Morgan, Councillor London has come in with a point of order.
I hope it's a point of order because
Councillor Morgan, can you wait to be here, please? Councillor Morgan.
Including yourself.
Convener, can I just clarify?
Councillor London.
Thanks very much, Convener. In terms of standing orders, as far as I was aware, standing orders were specific around the ability of members to critique other members and pass comment or on their lines of questioning. I'm not entirely clear whether Councillor Morgan's question is a question for officers or just an attempt at raising points in relation to my contribution, in which case I'd ask, Convener, that you consider that not to be appropriate. Councillor Morgan shouldn't be spending his time critiquing me in terms of my line of question. I've got every right to ask questions at committee, and Councillor Morgan's temperament is quite inappropriate.
Councillor London, can you give me a second? Councillor Morgan, do you have a question? Councillor Morgan, do you have a question?
I think he needs to unmute himself to have his rant, Convener.
Apologies, Convener. I muted Councillor Morgan. I can't seem to unmute him.
Right, okay. Do you have a question, Councillor Morgan? Can you unmute him, please, Andrew?
Yeah.
I can't hear him. Councillor Morgan.
If you just bear with me, a moment. For some reason, it's not letting me unmute people today. Richard, I don't know if you're able to unmute Councillor Morgan.
Sorry, Andrew, I'm not. I can only send a request for unmuting for some strange reason.
Councillor Morgan, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Councillor Morgan, do you have a question regarding
I have a question indeed, Convener, and I hope you show flexibility to be the same as you've shown to other people. If we're going to be allowed to ask every question here, we could clog up this particular item every time it comes. So I intend to come back with questions the next time round. But in the meantime, could the officers clarify for me? I heard it said there by a previous speaker that he was incredulous, that he saw some reports on here for individual projects. Sure, I picked up these papers last night and read them in detail. There are projects on there for Airdrie North. That's other members. Is it not the case? Is it not the case, can officers clarify, that all elected members are at liberty to request and put up projects on these papers and without the actual having to vet it? Without having to vet it by other elected members, it's the officers that are instructed to put these up to committee, and committee will do that. Other members are entitled to put reports up. If somebody hasn't seen them, that's up to them.
Councillor Morgan, is there a question on the paper? No. I think the best thing with us, usually we do come in and say if there is a problem with something, that is when it is raised. Councillor Linden had a request regarding the View Park Gardens. It's an ongoing thing at the minute within the area. I have been very much involved with it, as has Leanne, and that is why it is relevant at the minute. It's across more than one ward, and it is something which is undergoing at the minute. It will come up again under the CAT applications. So it is more than one thing, Councillor Morgan. Okay. Any other questions?
Convener, Councillor Dinesh Ashraf, I don't know if he's making a point of order asking a question, but you'll be able to clarify that.
As point of order, sorry, Councillor Ashraf.
Was the address that I was going to point out that
I'm afraid you're getting sort of cut off, Councillor Ashraf. I'm not sure.
I was just to say that on our book. Can you hear me?
Okay then, Councillor Ashraf?
What's that, sorry?
I think it was he was coming in with the same as Councillor Linden. Is that correct, Councillor Ashraf?
Yeah, I was just to say on a community board, I don't think it's an issue for councillors to be raising community issues. As is in Community Empowerment Committee on an agenda point for community boards. I think that's quite plain. I just wanted to. But, I think this is taking longer critiquing each other's contributions than actually just getting on with what the agenda point. But I was pleased with how the convener dealt with it. That's all.
Right. Okay, Councillor Ashraf. Any other questions on the actual paper? Right. No. Right. Do we agree the
Around the house, I'm here.
Convener, I think Councillor Morgan may be unmuted.
I've just muted them, Convener.
Do we agree the recommendations? Thank you. If we can go on to item 6, please. And that is Audrey Cameron. Audrey, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Right, thanks, Audrey.
This report advises committee about a change in the setting of equality outcomes for 2021 to 2025, which were due to be reported in Committee Cycle 4. The background to the report in section 1.2 details all of the reporting requirements of the public sector equality duties, such as progress we've made in relation to our equality outcomes set in 2017, information about our employees, an equal pay statement, etc. All of these, including the new outcomes, have to be published by the 30th of April 2021. Setting equality outcomes requires engaging with people with protected characteristics. In a world where social distancing seems to be the new norm, engagement with some people who share characteristics can be more challenging. In 2.3, the report talks about some of the challenges in engaging in a digital world with people where there are additional barriers to engagement, including maybe language, physical, mental and sensory impairments. For instance, existing data tells us that many older Asian people are significantly less likely to have used the internet than white people belonging to the same age groups. and the same applies to the older British Sign Language users. British Sign Language users will also need good, reliable video technology to participate in any online engagement activity, and providing interpreters is also a fundamental consideration which requires good planning. An aspect of engagement being undertaken by the Council discussed in section 2.4 is a piece of research into the lived experiences of North Lanarkshire's Black, Asian and minority ethnic people and communities, which is in the final stages of development before being carried out. Much of the information received through this research will inform the setting of the new equality outcomes. It's crucial to the integrity of this research that it's done properly and not hurried. Additionally, the Council's recently set up cross-party Black Lives Matter working group will also influence the setting of the equality outcomes, so it's clear we're not in a position to report during cycle 4. However, it is important to note that good efforts are being made to overcome the barriers to engagement. We've brought together a British Sign Language steering group, and this involved using BSL interpreters online. And the feedback from the meeting was very positive, but it is fragile and can only work well with good connectivity. And you also can't share documents on screen with BSL users, obviously, because it hides people on the screen. So it's all a bit of a learning curve. For the Black, Asian and minority ethnic research, we've also made good use of key individuals and organisations in different communities to act as a support for people who won't be able to access the survey online for whatever reason. The survey has also been translated into 5 different languages. Notwithstanding the above, committees advised that preparations to publish, as required by the 30th of April 2021, are underway, and a corresponding report will be prepared for the Community and Power Committee on the 26th of April 2021. That's confirmed the report. If there's any questions.
I don't see any questions on the chat bar. So do we agree the recommendation that we will have a report back for April? Oh, Councillor Ashraf, sorry, you've come in after I had started speaking. Councillor Junaid Ashraf.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, the WebEx is still messing up a little bit. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic report. However, I just had a question in terms of if this isn't going to be feeding into the outcomes for the 2021 to 25 report. A number of these things which are coming back. I do realise a number of the research and engagement that will be happening with the community will come back to obviously the Black Lives Matter working group that had its first meeting a couple of weeks ago, which was fantastic. A number of the members are here who are also as part of that group. I just wanted to know where it would really be feeding into, like the specifics of any reports and things like that coming back to this committee or other committees. Are they able to? Is Audrey able to outline the research which is happening within the community? Will it feed into next year's report or a similar report? I mean, essentially, with this research and engagement that's happening with the community, what's going to happen with it? Could you outline a little bit more specifics?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Ashraf. Audrey, can you answer that, please?
Well, originally the idea was that the research would be undertaken and it would be analysed and it would be the subject of a community conference where we would invite communities, partners, and it would develop into, I suppose, an action plan, a way forward that would fit in with the plan for North Lanarkshire. So it wasn't only just about the council, but it was the contribution that all of our partners and communities coming together and, I suppose, working together to address any of the issues and the disadvantages that people are experiencing in North Lanarkshire. So that was the original plan. Obviously, life's changed somewhat. So the idea now is that all the information will still be analysed, but will inform the council's equality outcomes, and we'll all share that information with our partners, and maybe if we're able to, a community conference of some description will be able to take place early next year or in the spring. But there's a major piece of research not been carried out before in North Lanarkshire, So we have to use the information that's available, and the key to all of this will be the analysis. The survey itself is we're using a SNAP survey rather than a SurveyMonkey, because SNAP apparently is much better facilities for analysing information, so that we can drill down, to intersectionality within the different groups. So we know that, for instance, we'll be able to tell if, for instance, what Muslim women may experience harassment and differently than, for instance, Polish women. So we'll be able to look at, I suppose, the intricacies and the different nuances within the research. But I think that analysis will take a bit of time. But yeah, certainly it'll be correlated into a report that will be presented to the next Community and Power Committee if that's a way that you would like to see it move forward. Obviously, it'll be presented to the Black Lives Matter working group as well, and inform our equality outcomes. But it'll certainly be published and used, and an action plan developed from it.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Ashraf?
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking to see is basically, obviously, if this report's going to be published for the Council's Equality Outcomes for 2021 to 25, and there's a significant amount of work being done by Audrey and other members from the Council, but obviously doesn't meet the same deadline that obviously it's still it's part of some sort of report, some sort of plan, some sort of substantive amount of work. Hopefully, I don't know, even if there's an aspect of updating the equality outcome plan for the council. I mean, if that's the plan that we're running with as the major work for the council, you would definitely like to see the substantive amount of work be part of that, as opposed to being part of its own little mini report. I mean, you want to give it the sort of credibility and the sort of importance that it does require, because I think everyone's impressed by the sort of nuance that's been carried out in this work. So I just wanted to make sure that was happening. If Audrey's happy with that, I mean, I don't know if there could be the suggestion that there could be somewhat of an update or an addition or add to the larger report of the equalities outcomes. But obviously, if Audrey's able to outline whether or not that's possible or not. But that's everything. As long as it's coming back to some sort of report, I suppose.
I think Audrey will ensure that everything is done that way, and it would be marvellous if we could have a conference early in 2021, Audrey. That would be great.
Yeah, I agree.
Anna McVeigh.
Morning, everyone. Audrey, thanks very much for bringing this report. I think it's the time that's been taken to develop this, to get it right, I think is to be congratulated, because critical to its success is the partnership work to enable the meaningful engagement and that trust building that's gone on with partner organisations and with specific communities. So I want to congratulate you and others in the partnership work that's been done here. I think it's a really important, as you say, as an inaugural piece of research. I hope it's one that we do again continuously, because I think it could really inform a whole range of pieces of work going forward. We talk often about seldom heard voices. This is a real stride of connectivity. I'm interested beyond the conference and the publishing of a report about how we keep these channels of communication open. Now, I'm not expecting Audrey or anybody else to come in with a 5-point plan about how we'll talk to people. I'll be happy, convener, if we can just commit to, now we've established these positive relationships and some have been nurtured over quite a period of time, that we make sure that we keep these lines of communication open, particularly when it is so difficult for us to meet in person.
I think we can guarantee that Audrey will not let anything slip. She is very, very diligent in her work regarding equalities, and can't praise her enough for the work that she does. Is that okay, Councillor Brianna McVeigh? Do we agree the recommendations of the report? Yep. Okay. because there are no other questions. Agenda item number 7, and it's on to yourself, Leanne.
Thanks, convener. Report provide an update on the delivery of 9 community listening events that took place earlier, just a few months ago. They were organised in response to a request to support the work of the Scottish Government's Social Renewal and Advisory Board. The board is basically looking to understand the policy and practice shift that may be required as a result of community response to COVID-19. All 32 local authorities participated and delivered in ways appropriate to their area. In North Lanarkshire, we decided to undertake events across the 9 community board areas. They took place between the 1st and the 4th of September, and they included participation from individuals and those representing groups who work closely with those who were most affected by COVID-19. There was a real effort made to try and engage with those who were experiencing or had experienced poverty throughout the kind of initial response and lockdown, etc., or those who were part of the protected characteristics. There was a total of 91 participants across all of the areas. The events were remote using WebEx. There was a maximum of 12 people participating in each event. That varied area to area, but there was an average of kind of 10 people, I think, participating in each of them. But we did limit the numbers, and that was so that we could really engage and allow the conversation to be much more focused around these people's stories. They only lasted an hour and a half. Again, that was to maintain a level of focus. As I said, particular effort to involve those with lived experience of poverty and inequality throughout the earlier parts of lockdown and throughout that community response to COVID-19. Materials were provided and all the questions were provided from the Scottish Government, and that was to maintain a level of consistency across Scotland so that they can really look at some of the kind of key issues. The key questions that were asked were around what changed for you and your community during lockdown, what worked and what didn't, and what does a good life for you look like. A number of key themes. So you'll see in the report we have provided quite a lot of detail in terms of who participated, what some of the issues that were coming up for each area. We were quite reluctant to just generalise it all because there was really stories coming out. It was really looked at from the story of the individual, and we didn't want to lose that. So you'll see there's quite a lot of information in the appendices, but there were some kind of general things coming out across the board. For example, you know, how well communities were able to organise themselves and respond when they needed to, and how we need to build on that and build on that resilience that exists within communities. Social isolation and mental health was coming out across the board, and the impact that lockdown had on people, regardless of what their kind of background or circumstances were. It seemed to be coming out of board. Communication at times could have been better, but there was a recognition that we were all just learning, and this was a very different situation for everyone, but there was recognition that there were times that communications across sectors could have been better. And there was particular issues highlighted around healthcare and people feeling that their access to healthcare was limited, that there was a lack of, at times, consistency, depending on what area you lived in terms of how GPs were able to respond or support or see individuals. And the other thing that kind of came out was around the impact of loss on people at this time. You know, the fact that people weren't necessarily able to grieve in the way that they normally, and that, you know, the ability to have the funeral that they might have normally anticipated for their loved ones was kind of limited. Obviously the impact of being able, you know, the religious side of that and how people were able to kind of practice their own religion. And there was also some concern, particularly around mental health of young people, and particularly young people, with a number of young people involved in the sessions who shared their experiences of being at key transition points within their life, and how that was impacted upon and didn't have the normal outlets that they would have, and, you know, I suppose being cooped up with your family at an age where you would normally be out with your friends and experiencing different things. So those were some of the kind of key things that were coming out across the board, but a lot of very individual experience and some stories that really were eye-opening, actually. So committee, so since we have since we undertook these sessions, there has been we're now looking to use a similar approach to make sure that some of the seldom heard voices and that we're able to be a bit more targeted in the engagement around things like development of the local outcome improvement plans. So community listening events are being organised around those, using some of the learning from the earlier ones to really be able to target and to make sure that it's not just the people who would typically engage, but to make sure that we are targeting approaches to those who are maybe less likely to engage with us under normal circumstances. And we're also looking to do that for a number of other subject matters. Committee's asked to note the response to the community listening events and some of the feedback that's there, and also to note the wealth of information that came from the events, although it wasn't massive numbers. Just understanding some of the experiences of those most affected was really quite useful and quite powerful, I think. To agree that more detailed reports go to each of the community board areas specific to that area, to make sure that the findings of those events are embedded within, I suppose, the development of the local outcome improvement plans and any local action that's agreed. And ultimately just to make sure, to agree that we make sure that the finding of those events is reflected in the recovery process moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. Very full description there, and I think only Councillor Linden on the chat bar. Councillor Linden.
Thanks, Convener. Just very briefly, Leanne, an interesting report and an example of how local government can work in partnership with national government to contribute to shared outcomes. Quite interested in particular at section 1.1 of the report around the aim of the board being to build on the shifts in policy and practice seen as a result of working across portfolios in partnership with frontline services during COVID. Beyond what's been outlined at section 3 and 4 of the recommendations, I wondered how we can or are utilising the rich experience and data collection exercise that's obviously taking place in terms of recommendation 2 to inform the council's corporate strategic work. Beyond obviously there's an element of local focus in section 4 of the recommendations around the LOIPs and the council's equality outcomes, etc. But I wondered in particular in terms of the plan for North Lanarkshire and the council's corporate strategy, some of that data obviously will have thrown up some interesting thoughts, and I guess how that's been assessed by CMT or others in terms of developing council strategic direction.
Convener, I can respond to that if that's okay.
Of course you can, Leanne.
So a similar report to this has been considered at corporate management team, so they are cited certainly on the kind of key points out of the report. In addition to that, obviously we're taking more localised reports to the local community boards to make sure that there's that localised consideration for communities, but also for our community planning partners at that level. We would anticipate taking something to the North Lanarkshire Partnership strategic leadership group to make sure that they, again, in a wider but more strategic and leadership sense, are taken into consideration, because our partners were involved at a local level in organising these sessions, but we absolutely want to make sure that some of the findings are embedded across that more strategic discussion. But really importantly as well is what we're doing is we're highlighting, we're picking out the key things that are coming out, and we're making sure that any feedback that's relevant to a particular service or a particular team that we think requires a bit of consideration or action, or even just a bit more communication to clarify with communities what the process is or what we're doing around a particular issue is being fed into the appropriate services and teams. A good example of that is that we've recently fed some of the key points around mental health to Jenny, who's leading around the key parts of the kind of mental health. So we are doing that. We're trying to kind of unpick and feed the right information to the relevant people who would be able to take action or to initiate some discussion around what we need to do to respond.
Is that okay, Councillor Linden? Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thanks, Convener. Can you hear us?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Convener, there is a question here, and ironically it's predicated on a development of the points that Councillor Linden correctly highlighted there. He came in and asked about feeding this back into a corporate structure. I'm a bit concerned about the report in front of us here. I'm well aware of the difficulties in continuing to provide services, And in a way, that's what this report is about. It's about listening to events and how people experience the ongoing problems. But I do get concerned when I see comments, and there's a plethora of information here. There's one there on page 49 that really disturbs me. And that ironically, Leanne has highlighted that this is one of those that was mentioned in all areas. And it's that one, statutory services were totally invisible. Now, the veracity of that has to be authenticated or evaluated. But that has to be seen. That might just be a one-off, anecdotal, somebody didn't get it. But when you take it back, and this is the point, Chair, of rather than just a question seen in the context of the report, you then look and you say, well, what is our statutory services? But then you look at the report, and the onus is on that group, Leanne, that you've formulated there. It's on CLD. So where are our statutory services, such as education? We're talking about poverty, and education's not in there. That's an omission. Housing has to be in there because it's not a statutory, but we've got statutory obligations. I'm glad to see, and this is not because I'm the convener, health and social care at least were one of the participants. But there's various omissions here that unless they're participating, and there's no excuse here, IT is there across the board. I know that you're trying to limit it to a 12-15 feedback, but when feedback comes of that nature, I do think that those departments that are identified as statutory should at least be participating and there at the butt end to hear this feedback. Otherwise, it's going through a filter and they're only getting the second or third hand. That has always been an issue with some departments that think they don't want to mix with the unclean. And it's left to CLD to get in there, into the communities. But that is not the culture that's promised in the final part of the report, convener. And that is in page 54, where we're saying here that this exercise will promote and achieve a culture of openness and listening. Now, I could easily get sarcastic there and bring in other levels of government, but we'll stick to North Lanarkshire here while we're on a positive tone. If we're going to promise that it's a culture of openness and listening, that will merely be a vacuous statement if these departments are not involved with their sleeves rolled up, interfacing there with members of the public. Why were they not there? And for future reports, can they be told to be there so that it's not just coming back in a written report, that they're hearing it for themselves?
Leanne, are the other departments involved?
They are. I think, Councillor Morgan, just on your point there, we were very close that we didn't want these sessions to become dictated by officers or professionals. These sessions were very much about local communities telling their stories, and there were some circumstances whereby people just didn't necessarily have the confidence to come along. So that's the only case where we had a staff member who was representing a kind of group of people, and even at that it was kept very much to voluntary sector organisations where possible. I think the Health and Social Care Partnership, because there are specific community-led structures that sit within the wider process for health and social care, that's probably why you've seen that reflected within the list of participants. We were very conscious that we wanted this to be about communities sharing their stories and individuals sharing their stories, so we didn't invite the services or partners to come along to the sessions, but we did engage with them in advance to make sure that their particular client groups were reflected in the participant list, and we did reach out through their structures to ensure participation, and I think what we agreed was that we then share the findings of the sessions with the services and teams, and also through corporate management team and committee, to make sure that there is that level of accountability around if something's been identified, that there's that kind of trace back to who and how it's been shared with. So I think we did involve them, but we made a conscious decision not to involve them in the individual sessions because the brief was very much about the voice of communities, and we didn't want any be taken over, I suppose, by the voice of officers or services.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Morgan?
It does, and I can understand, well, it does to the extent of the balance of getting the community voice. But when you're getting a comment and a feedback like that it was mentioned over many, if not all areas, the statutory services were totally invisible. If you've got that forum and you've got those people, and then you can buy it a couple of weeks later, they tell that to departments, or there shouldn't be a gap there. Those departments, particularly where we're providing statutory services, from own knowledge, I think that's education, housing certainly would have statutory services, social work, and I do think there's a certain element of community services. Bin collection, so on and so forth. Somebody mentioned, was it Councillor Linden or somebody earlier? No, it was Leanne Pollock, about how moving it was during this experience, about bereavements. Community services should be there to hear about that. So unless they're there, I would hope that the officers take that away and maybe look at that from a different angle. Don't necessarily have to play a part, but they should at least be listening in to what people are saying out there in our communities.
Thanks,
Convener,
Leanne.
could I just very briefly come back? Also, just to pick up on, I mean, we did try to be quite honest in the feedback that we collated, because we did want to reflect people's experiences. Obviously, how that's kind of dealt with in terms of any action or anything will be dealt with sensitively. We did want to obviously protect people, and we did anonymise the feedback. But we did want to be honest in terms of some of the things that were coming out. And there was a lot of really positives coming out in terms of the relationships with statutory services as well. I think we need to remember that what people were reflecting on, it was still quite raw. It was about the early stages of lockdown, and although there was a recognition, I think some individuals maybe felt they didn't know necessarily how to, and I think that's what they were trying to say, they didn't know how to access services, it wasn't clear enough to them. And I think probably as things moved on, it would be a different, probably slightly different, a bit more positive. But I think we did ask people to be honest, and we did want to reflect it in the most honest way possible. But I just wanted to highlight there was a lot of positives that came out as well, and people recognising that this was new to the council and other statutory services too. So they understood that sometimes the community, we were just all trying to get it right. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that there was also a lot of really positives.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Leanne.
Thanks, Leanne. Councillor Brannan McVeigh.
Thanks very much, Convener. Leanne, I really appreciate this report. As you say, there's a real honesty and rawness within it. Some of it's joyful to read, and other bits is exceptionally painful. But I think we've got an opportunity here to services about how they communicate, because we can all sit and know how things are done as much as we like, but if the greater public don't know that, then that is a real challenge. So we need to do that. But I think that there is a real opportunity and a challenge here, that we have community capacity building and community empowerment right at the heart of what we are doing, but it cannot be left solely to those who come to this committee. We need this committee to play a real, in those services that connect to here, a real leadership role in it. But we do need to make sure that other services communicate clearly and precisely their roles and responsibilities, because otherwise my fear is that the CLD staff, the community empowerment staff, the community capacity building staff will be overwhelmed with a tsunami of people who need and desire your support. We need to have that connectivity across services, which means we need to make sure that we have dovetail where it is pertinent and distinction where it is relevant, because what we can't afford duplication of effort and energy, whether that be in our internal processes or indeed with our third sector partners or community organisations. There was a bit quite often in the, if you like, the lockdown part response, that to do community work who were not previously available as assets within the community because of where they worked, how they worked, and they were able to get there. So them not knowing, I think, is a barrier for them to overcome. And I do think a lot of people would take that huge wealth of knowledge that they have now about how we'll inform any second phase, should it be required, God willing, please let us not. But, and there's no often you'll hear me saying phrases like that, but because we have said consistently, these are unprecedented times. We are working in a manner that we haven't done. I am delighted that the value of community work, youth work, adult learning, our ESOL teams, our community capacity building work, community development work has really had an opportunity to have the light that it deserves in Youth Work Week and in any week shone upon it. But we cannot have you overwhelmed. We need to look at, yes, Councillor Morgan was entirely right, how our tenants participation staff work, how our planning engagement staff work, with the communities and engage with those communities. And we need to make sure that as a body corporate, we inform people about how to get into that two-way dialogue with us, because we'd be as well howling into a cave or howling at the moon if we don't change how we communicate, if it's no fitting and landing well with our communities, because there is wonderful work done. When we saw the COVID response reports coming into each of the committees, anti-policy and strategy, I am always proud to be in local government, but that made my heart sing, the way that people burst out of silos, as they should have done long ago, linked arms virtually, and joined in and really threw their arms around our community, providing the support that they do. That's what local government does best. This report really shines a light on a lot of that in the work that we're doing with our communities, but we also need to be informed and say, Colcanny, we need to reflect and learn, and we also need to hold a mirror up to some of your departments that do this well, and all to those as well. So apologies for a monologue, convener, it wasn't my intention.
Not like you, Councillor Brannon McVeigh.
It's not like
don't let you and Councillor London together start. We could have a wee dialogue between you. But I think it's great to hear the staff that feed into this committee getting praised for the work. I mean, they've certainly been at the forefront of everything throughout this pandemic, and we are proud of them, and I think we've got every right to be.
But we need to
think you were looking for that
as well,
response, were you?
Yeah, no, but it is definitely about the positives and those who don't normally get a light shone in them shone. But it's also about saying, for those who had to work in a new way and engage with our communities in a new way, they need to learn from that, and we need to say to ourselves, what can we continue to do as we reshape?
How can all departments learn? Yeah. I think we've just got one more to come in, Councillor McGowan.
I think it's great that the council is listening to all voices, and it's very important that all these points are addressed at some point. One point that I think is very important is that it says people appear to be going for walks more often and exploring their local community. Now, I think that crosses across so many departments. You know, it's reducing pollution, it's helping climate change, health and well-being, mental health, isolation, loneliness. All of these can be covered by doing a simple thing like going a walk and being outside. It's free. There's no cost to go out for a walk. Who knows where it'll end when you go for a walk, who you'll meet, who you'll build relationships with. I think that is a really important point, and I hope that the council is looking at that carefully and going to increase their spaces for people, development, and that will be continued into the future, because I think that is crucial to life, that people get out and walk, get out and meet people, get out into the community, either walk or cycle, and for all the reasons I've said. So I just want to ask Leanne, is there a definite, continuation of encouraging people to get out and walk and build relationships, and it could improve so many things in life?
Leanne?
As you say, Councillor McGowan, that fits across so many different services and priority areas, and it absolutely is a priority from a health perspective, from, as you say, from a climate perspective, and all the work around reducing pollution, etc. It absolutely is. As far as I can see, it fits across a number of streams of work within the plan for North Lanarkshire. So it absolutely is a priority. But as we said earlier, what we'll make sure happens from this particular exercise is that those kind of key issues that have been highlighted from communities, or the positives that we think should be built upon, will be fed across those services and teams that we think, and indeed our partner agencies such as NHS Lanarkshire, to make sure that they are aware that that's something that's been discussed through these sessions, and that's considered in terms of how they communicate. Because I think there's probably something about not just the action that we're taking kind of behind the scenes and the actions, but as Councillor Brannon McVeigh picked up on, it's how we're communicating to communities and telling them about the different opportunities for using outdoor space and the benefits. And so I think there's a lot of work that could be done around that, and indeed is already underway. But certainly we will be sharing that across teams and identifying any kind of missing action and anything that we could be doing to support that moving forward.
I think you'll all see on the chat bar that June has put up that there are local walking routes for the Duke of Edinburgh day walks, etc. So that's something for people to look into. And I have to agree with Councillor McGowan that certainly in my local area, the cycle path through View Park Glen has been very much used by people from Bellshill, Coatbridge and Thornywood. So it has, the amount of people using it now compared to what was is amazing. And I think I see Liz Fergus want to come in a minute. Right, Liz?
Thank you, Convener. I would also just want to say that within our adult learning and within our family learning, one of the things that has come out of COVID-19 is the whole thing about walking. We always focus on indoor group work and small group work, and one of the things that the staff have been doing is actually going up and meeting with, say, a parent who is struggling with young kids and actually helping that parent get out of the house, go a walk with them, and do some kind of one-to-one support. And we used to always do that in the confines of a community centre with the young people. We were always kind of looking at different environments, but that, after COVID, I think that's something that we will continue. We do a lot of ESOL learning whilst there's walking going on. We've been doing a lot of Wednesday walks within our adult learning where we've had a lot of folk. So that would be something that we would be absolutely, something that we didn't do before. We've been extremely creative to make sure that we're maintaining contact with families, adults, young people in our communities, but we will be certainly keeping that as a focus after COVID about, encouraging that kind of physical activity and well-being whilst learning, and probably, that has been a strength of what's come out of the COVID and how we've had to adapt our practice. I just wanted to bring that in for Councillor McGowan.
If any of you didn't quite get that, it is about a lot of the work being done outdoors, going walks with families, and even the ESOL work being done outside and on walking and encouraging that as a way forward for working, which I think is brilliant. I think our community learning teams have been amazing here, and they have been looking outside the box as to how they've worked, which is, well, I don't think I'd expect any less from the team concerned, because they're always outstanding. Do we approve the recommendations, people? Yep. Okay, if we can go on to item 8 now. And that is Lizanne.
Thank you, Convener. This report gives members the opportunity to get an overview of the statutory annual report that we publish in terms of community asset transfer and participation requests. As you will be aware, it is a requirement of the Community Empowerment Act that we prepare and publish a report of this nature. The report details in Appendix 1 and Table 1, that's paragraph 2.1.3, the status of the 42 inquiries that we've received over the course of the year, and some detail as to the process undertaken by the team of working with the groups who had expressed an interest in working with us in terms of community asset transfer. Section 2.4 of the report gives a short bullet pointed improvement plan, but what I would like to probably add to that is that the team are always happy to offer briefings for members on the process. So if you would like further briefing sessions arranged, we're happy to arrange that. We're also looking at preparing, because this is a report that is just about the process rather than necessarily how it strategically fits in with the overall plan for North Lanarkshire. So what the team are looking at doing at the moment is preparing a report for the Policy and Strategy Committee, which gives members a bit more information on how best we can use the process to support taking forward key elements of the plan for North Lanarkshire. But happy to take any questions, Convener. Thank you.
Councillor Linden seems to be the only person in.
Thanks,
Councillor Linden.
Thanks very much, Convener, and I'll try to keep my question brief to avoid any members getting the impression that I'm here for a surgery. In terms of page 74, Lisanne, in relation to View Park Gardens Trust, two questions really. One, it says that a full CAT has been received and is due for assessment in autumn 2020. We're fast approaching winter 2020. I guess the question is, when will the assessment outcome be published or notified to the group? And in particular, why, if the full CAT has been received, is this item not sitting at section 4 of the report on page 71 in terms of an outstanding full CAT request? Surely that's where it should be, as opposed to an early inquiry if a full CAT has been lodged. So I think it's been misplaced in terms of the paper. And then I guess another question, as a point of clarity, in relation to View Park Allotment Association, around a liaison underway to finalise extension to lease. If I'm not mistaken, I think that Finance and Resources Committee just approved said lease at a recent meeting, and therefore is the paper inaccurate in that regard, or is there further work being done to have a further extension of the lease in terms of the land and duration? So clarity on that as well, Convener. And Convener, just apologies again for raising an issue that's very local, but as you rightly say, Convener, it's cross-ward and cross-interest to the council.
I think Leanne has been dealing with this, is that correct, Lisanne? And Leanne and I have been in contact regularly over this, and there is a date and the group are aware of it. If Leanne can...
Happy for Leanne to give the details of the date for the leadership group to carry out that consideration of the work of the assessment group. Just in terms of the timing of the report, because of I suppose the timing committee, when reports are prepared and when this was actually published and due to be published, there are timing issues with the content of the report. So Council London's absolutely correct, but we'll make sure that these are noted and remedied. But Leanne, if you'd like to come in and through you, Convener, give the detail.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisanne. Thanks, Convener. I suppose just to clarify as well that is a year-end report, so it does really only cover you up till the end of March this year, and you know, so some of the wording maybe doesn't necessarily make sense, but absolutely accept that. That specific individual case that you're talking about, the process is underway, so it's well and truly underway. So the process for the assessment of a community asset transfer request is that there's a kind of multi-service group made up of key officers across the individual services that the CAT's going to impact upon, and we've also got legal, financial representation, etc. And they undertake the assessment based on the agreed criteria. That happened last month. That happened early in October. So that initial assessment's been undertaken. The next stage in the process is that the kind of report that comes from that, with all the considerations and all reflecting all of the discussion across services against the criteria, goes to the Community Asset Transfer Leadership Group, and that's made up of James McKinstry, Lisanne McMurrough and Robert Steenson, given their respective roles in leading this process. They would then consider the findings of the earlier assessment and make recommendation to committee. In this particular case, that will go to the Environment and Transportation Committee, and in terms of the timescales, it won't go until February, so we won't have a final decision until February. That has all been agreed, so on paper that from receiving the community asset transfer, which was July, late June, early July, we should be reaching a decision within 6 months, unless it's been agreed with the group to extend that. Ongoing dialogue with the group highlighted that they wanted a wee bit more time at the earlier part of the process, because we'd asked them for some additional information, and just taking into consideration the impact of COVID on the group and their ability to collect some of the information that we had requested from them, they had asked that we had moved the timescales, which meant we didn't meet the November timescale committee. The final decision should be taken at the February committee. And the group are aware of that. We've been having ongoing dialogue with the group around the process. And in terms of the particular that you picked up around the allotments group, that is correct. That I think that has been kind of moved forward since the report was produced.
You're right, correct, Leanne, it was at Finance. Yep. Anything else, Councillor Linden?
No, many thanks, Convener.
Right. Okay, I would like to thank Lizanne and Leanne for their input there, and we look forward to February for our local area. And I know it is being parochial, I suppose. Do we agree with the recommendations from the report? Yep. If we can go on to item 9 now, which is back to Matt.
I think, is Jonathan speaking to this report?
I had your name given, is it
Sorry,
yourself,
yeah,
Jonathan? Jonathan?
Yeah.
Right, Jonathan Smith.
Yeah. Good morning, Convener. Apologies for that. The purpose of this report is to, it's in line with the programme of work and it builds on the report that was considered at the last meeting in respect of the work of the community and voluntary sector contribution to the COVID-19 crisis and the links to investment and renewal. The report describes the development of an action plan aimed at delivering an approach to funding and investment that is reflective of the current and future operating conditions. The plan includes ongoing work in a number of areas, and we've actually highlighted progress throughout the report using a RAG assessment. Some of the highlights from the action plan include the fact that Voluntary Action North Lanarkshire have carried out a survey of the sector which sought to gather views on the challenges faced by local community organisations throughout the crisis period and into and beyond the recovery phase. The findings have been assessed and they include there was an increase in support in a range of areas for particularly vulnerable groups. However, there was a reduction in support, in particular for care experienced young people and children. Some of the impacts on staff and volunteers included 22% of staff were furloughed and volunteering therefore reduced by 38% during the lockdown. And there were some impacts on the finances of local organisations. Pre-pandemic, there were some sustainability threats for some organisations because of reduced income, and while additional crisis funding to support activities was welcome, there are continuing concerns over the future. A fuller summary, obviously, of the findings is included at Appendix 1. In terms of existing investment, the details of what is invested throughout our communities is being gathered in order to improve targeting and link it to the work of community boards. This resonates obviously with previous items on the agenda in terms of how linked up all this work actually is. We're actually working to determine who could be described as key local anchor organisations who we may work with in each locality, and a definition of a community anchor is included in the report. We're actually carrying out a needs assessment in terms of population needs and assets, and the group are considering what type of information is needed to inform the decision-making process. And we're also looking at shared approaches to funding and funding support, which means the alignment of partnership procurement policies and procedures to meet community needs. As an addendum to this, we're also looking to include community wealth building, and the final paragraph describes the importance of including community wealth building in development of investment priorities, the use of social capital and community assets. And again, that resonates with what's been previously discussed at this meeting. And finally, the recommendations are to note the content of the report and agree to receive future progress reports as this whole agenda develops. I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, Councillor Linden, I think you're the only person there.
Sorry, Convener, apologies, but an important report for members to critique. I guess a positive to start with, the Vanel report on the sector's COVID recovery response, I think, is a welcome report. Shows the depth of I would probably use the word reliance on the community and voluntary sector to support the work of the statutory services to help fill the gap in provision. And I think we heard that earlier in relation to the Social Inclusion Board. Two questions, really, Convener. One on the report moving forward, and one very specific to the report. The first question is, in the executive summary, it's mentioned that the community and voluntary sector's role in response to the COVID-19 crisis response and the crucial relationship between that area of work and the development of the commission and investment model. Notwithstanding the recommendation 2, be grateful if officers could outline some early thoughts around how the COVID crisis will impact that commission and investment model more long term, because you would assume that in terms of COVID-19 that there'd be some short to medium term impact on the commission investment model, but more long term strategically you would think that there'd be a long term commission investment model that would be beyond the realms and beyond the scope of COVID. And then secondly, as you would expect, and if people had put were betting people who'd expect me to raise this, Convener, it relates to section 2.2.2 of the report, to see in the report that the impact of COVID-19 crisis measures on services saw a reduction in support, in particular for care experienced young people and children, is intolerable. I can't believe that is the case. It's a real concern. Convener, I recognise that it focuses particularly on the sector, but my question, the obvious question, is that as corporate parents in terms of local government, but as corporate parents right across the community planning partners, how did we as statutory services and the corporate parents fill that gap if there has been a reduction in service in the community and voluntary sector to ensure that our children and young people who are care experienced get the support that they needed in a time of real difficulty? Because that ultimately is the response, if of any parent, but in particular of a corporate parent in a difficult time, Convener.
All right, Jonathan, can you come in to respond to these, please?
Yeah, if I could maybe take the second question first. I think that was a statistic from the analysis of the survey that was raised several eyebrows, obviously. However, the actual summary and the analysis was only received after the convener's deadline for this meeting, so I haven't actually had an opportunity to examine exactly what that means in terms of the broader perspective of the impact on that particular group. So that's something obviously we are, through the group, going to pick up and obviously involve the other statutory services that have some responsibility in that area. One, to deal with any actual impacts, and two, to make sure that that perception is actually accurate and real. The other one is that yes, I suppose this whole agenda is to fulfil two areas. One was to look at how we attach investment to need through the community planning process, and obviously the development of the community boards and everything else are quite key to that, and also what the COVID-19 crisis has actually taught us in terms of what the voluntary and community sector can contribute, which is obviously quite self-evident that they've got a huge range of skills, and there's a huge range of opportunities for us as public authorities to actually work in partnership with them to actually make sure that we build on the successes or perceived successes of the things that sector have been doing throughout this crisis. But in terms of the short to medium term funding issues, then clearly quite a lot of that is hopefully being looked at in terms of the central funding coming from Scottish Government and others around how we deal with the crisis. But what we're trying to do is to get all partners who commission work within the third sector to actually look to see that this is it's done in a much more coordinated and accurate fashion, and it's actually done in areas that the community can have some influence on, and that takes us back to the links to the whole community board agenda. So I hope that goes to answering the question.
Can I just come in
Have you got a
briefly?
supplementary, Councillor London? Yes.
Yeah, it's a question of a commitment, really. Can I ask, convener, through you, the head of service, Lisanne, ensures that that particular section of the report, 2.2.2, is raised at corporate management team to ensure that right across corporate council, we're in tier 3 on the precipice of tier 4. We hope not to go there, but if there is a detrimental impact on care experienced young people as a result of a loss in service, that our corporate management team are aware of that, and that we can consider how we respond as corporate parents appropriately.
I'm quite sure you'll do that, Lisanne, yeah?
Yes, certainly picking up on John's point, we need to have more information in terms of the veracity of that survey information and provide a context and response that was prepared by the statutory services to inform whether that is or isn't technically the case, and we will endeavour to do that and take that through the corporate management team and the appropriate service committees and the community planning partnership, children's services partnership as appropriate. Councillor London, just to pick up on the other question that you asked, I suppose around the issue of COVID and the impact short term, medium term, longer term on the sector in terms of community and voluntary sector. I think we're all concerned that there are huge sustainability issues around the community and voluntary sector, and we are taking steps to try and understand what that impact is, not only on communities but on those organisations who are key to supporting them right now, and whether in fact they will be there to support going forward, and what we then need to do as a result of concerns we have about the sustainability of key organisations to support the community planning partnership to do what we need to do. So not only are we looking at the needs of communities, we're looking at the needs of the community and voluntary sector, and certainly their very survival in some cases is a concern, and we need to I suppose be alert to that in our planning just as much as the needs of communities. We all need to work together to identify where we've got vulnerabilities in that particular aspect of the partnership approach.
Okay, Councillor London. I think we're all aware that voluntary sector have been fortunate in some ways during lockdown, with people being furloughed or people working from home, where there have been more people available to assist. Now with more people maybe back at work, they're going to be needing a lot more volunteers, and it's for maybe those who have not come forward, stepped up before, maybe they would now, because I think as communities we really do have to work together. And if Jonathan or yourself can keep us up to date, Lisanne, with the statistics once you've had a chance to delve into them properly. Do we approve the recommendations of the report? Agreed? Okay, if we can go on to item 9, which now is it Lisanne or Matt? Both names are beside the report. Who's going forward?
Item 10,
sorry.
10, yeah.
Item 10.
I'll come in on that, convener, if that's okay.
Right, thanks, Matt.
Okay, thanks. Just the purpose of this report is just to update committee on the status of the council's participatory budgeting process and the progress relating to adopting the approach to PB through the action plan that's contained within the report, outlining the next steps required in delivering what is termed as a mainstream approach. The report also encompasses the key findings of a recent internal audit of the PB pilot process, together with identified improvement actions and options to allow the council to achieve the target of at least 1% of the budget allocation being delivered via participatory mechanisms. It's recommended that the committee note the current status of the approach to delivering a mainstream approach to PB, note the work undertaken to address the findings of the internal audit report, and approve the mainstream action plan and process map set out in the appendices, convener.
Councillor Morgan is the only person I see in. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Morgan, can you unmute yourself, please?
That's the first time you've asked me to do that, convener. Hopefully I got it right.
Time for everything, Councillor Morgan.
Okay. A couple of points I seek clarification on, because if this is going to be the future, we've got to get it right. Let me say at the outset, I am not against participatory budgets. But if Edinburgh administrations of whatever political colour think they're so good, this should not be seen as it's a good idea, take it from your existing budget. It should be an additional allocation to the budget we get each year over whatever number of years we plan for. So that's the first point, and I don't think COSLA's hammered them enough about that. But to get clarity on what the calculation will be done, this 1%. On page 111, at the bottom of the page there, section 224, it says there, where budgets and or work streams are fixed with little flexibility, these should not be considered for inclusion. Now, staff are under enough uncertainty as it is. Does that mean to say that each department will not have its staffing? Because at the end of the day, our biggest budget allocation is for staff. Now, we're elected to, there's a democratic relationship between us and the electorate. That is then lost when you pass it on to non-elected. We know that people are activists and most of us started there, but we're accountable to the electorate for this public money. So can you clarify, under section 224 there, does that mean that all staff in the council payroll will not be at the mercy of a participatory budget exercise, which I think, as an elected representative, representing an area, representing the public purse, I don't think we should be putting our staff in that position of uncertainty. That's the first point for clarification, Chair. The second point is, in those areas Mark mentioned that the external audit looked at, on page 116, section 214, the external audit did say, and it's always good to be able to quote them, 1% of its non-ring-fenced budget. Now, what do we mean by that? Does that mean to say that statutory services will be deducted? Because at the end of it, our biggest expenditure is paying teachers. So we've got to not just take out our staff to safeguard them. They shouldn't be left at the mercy of a community, decision and leaving them uncertain. So we have to clarify statutory and discretionary services. And where we've got statutory services, education, social work, environmental, they cannot be left to the mercy of participatory budgets, which is a great exercise in itself. I would put it up to 10% if it's additional. But we've got COVID coming up, the bills are coming in for that, potentially further cuts. So the question, 2 points there. Will the staff not be included in this exercise of uncertainty? Will those areas that are statutory be excluded before we identify the figure that is up for analysis, perusal and distribution by a participatory budget board or whoever's deciding?
Mark, can you answer those points for Councillor Morgan, please?
Certainly, I'll try and answer the points that councillors raised. In terms of the approach to participatory budgeting for staffing, we're not looking at staffing per se for that, Councillor Morgan. We're looking at services. Potentially, there's a list of services being highlighted there within the report that looks at currently looking at different options that are available for that and being suggested. There is a group looking, the first meeting actually takes place later on this afternoon, a task and finish group involving a number of heads of service, myself, in relation to considering what areas that we can consider for potential participatory budgeting going forward. That's something that we've been looking at, and that'll be subject to further reports coming forward to this committee and others. So there'll be much clearer guidance and information in relation to that once we have a look at that going forward, and say that will come back to future committees. We are also, I know we're aware that there's further discussions ongoing between COSLA and the Scottish Government in relation to the delivery of mainstream PB, and that's something that's ongoing just now. I'm attending a meeting 2 weeks from today in relation to that, to get further guidance from the Scottish Government and from COSLA in relation to taking this, the mainstreaming of participatory budgeting forward. And again, we'll bring that to a future committee to give you further information and guidance in relation to that we receive as a council in terms of that going forward. And again, we'll also look at statutory and discretionary services that are there to ensure that the participatory budget approach that we're undertaking complies fully with guidance that comes from the Scottish Government and COSLA in relation to that. And again, we'll feed that back.
Convener, I appreciate that. The reason I'm asking this is it's more likely to affect the next administration. Who knows who of us might be playing a part. If I'm not playing a part, at least I'm magnanimous enough to ask the question for those of you that are going grey-haired over addressing issues like that. The serious point is this. Next time round, if our budget is £1,000 million, we have to be able to identify and say, it's not 1% of £1,000 million. You're not getting 10 million to identify projects in the community, while we're cutting teachers, social workers, housing staff, so on and so forth, although that's the HRA. We have to deduct the statutory services and then the balance is calculated. Albeit it won't kick in the next administration. It would seem it's going to kick in towards the end of this one. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to clarify that so we can try and get it right from the outset, Convener.
I think Matt has tried to reassure you in that. Would that be correct, Matt?
Yeah, that's certainly my intention, Convener.
Yeah. And the next meeting, you should have some feedback from the two meetings, the one this afternoon and the one with COSLA. So that should give more information, Councillor Morgan.
That's grand, thank you.
Next is Councillor London.
Thanks, Convener. I'll begin by commenting on the report and on the contribution we've heard around the relationship that community participatory budgeting has and the Scottish Government and local government, and then I have a question. I think it's important, Convener, section 2.1.7 outlines, I think, clearly, I'm sure I heard a mention that COSLA haven't hammered the Scottish Government enough. I think was the phrase I heard around participatory budgeting and where it comes from, but COSLA and Scottish Government jointly prepared a statement published in 2017 that recognises that it's not about additional resource, albeit I'm sure it would be welcome, but it's about actively involving local people and the public in participating in budget decisions right now. And I think that's the whole thrust of participatory budgeting, is recognising that it's not about additional resource or reducing resource, it's about recognising there is a pot of resource and ensuring that the public have as much of a say as possible over that in terms of that 1% target. So I think that's an important distinction to make around, it's about actively involving local people in decision making around budgets, as opposed to a specific additional budget for them to consider decision making around. And that brings me on to the point around the exclusion of statutory services. The whole point is that we want to see local people being involved more in decisions around the important services that matter to them. And I think that in terms of the report, I welcome the officers outline section 2.8.1 and 2.8.3, where I think there's a really powerful articulation of how statutory services like grounds maintenance, like environmental assets, can actively involve public participatory budgeting and local people setting priorities for those key services that are statutory and involving them in the decision making to prioritise what they see as important. Whether you've got an expanding budget, a reducing budget, or a budget that's fixed, involving local people in making those decisions is surely better and more democratic than excluding them from that decision making process. And that's the whole thrust of participatory budgeting. So I think that it's got lost in the mire somewhere in terms of contributions being made. Where I am concerned,
it's not statutory.
Sorry, I don't.
Point of clarification. It's not statutory.
Councillor Morgan, Councillor London did not interrupt you. Can you please mute your mic?
It's not statutory.
Councillor Morgan, mute your mic.
Thanks, Convener. I think that Councillor Morgan might want to review his temperament after the meeting, given that this is the second time that he's had to go.
Councillor London, I don't think we need remarks about another councillor, please. Can we continue?
Notwithstanding it, it's on the record, so I'm glad I said it, Convener, thanks. In terms of section 2.7 in the report, this is where the concern does lie for me, and I'd be grateful if officers could clarify in terms of section 2.7.4, as members will be aware, Scottish Attainment Challenge and People Equity Fund in particular, has been introduced by Scottish Government to ensure an element of devolved decision making by head teachers around the priorities that are important to them to help close the poverty-related attainment gap. So there is an element of concern for me there, in that we're already devolving that decision making to head teachers who are experts in their own local schools and their own local learning communities to make decisions. Therefore, I don't see how participatory budgeting could fit in that realm, where we're clearly devolving decision making to professionals to make those decisions to close that poverty-related attainment gap. So perhaps officers might provide reassurance around that particular example and how, if any, and I don't see that to be the case, there is a scope for PB in PEF. That is the contribution, Convener. Thanks very much for your approach.
Sorry, Lizanne, you said you would come in and respond to Councillor London's question.
Yes, just in terms of the pupil equity fund point, government revised guidance that came out probably more than 12 months ago on the pupil equity fund, specifically to support head teachers in deploying that funding, did suggest specifically that they consider participatory budgeting process in coming to decisions around how they would deploy the pupil equity fund. Yes, it doesn't detract from them leading that, but it was, I think, an attempt to make sure that head teachers were engaging beyond, I suppose, just parent councils on pupil equity fund deployment, and to look at wider impact on the community of decisions being taken around pupil equity fund. So I think it was just a drive to ensure there was more effective community engagement. Councillor London, if that helps.
Okay, Councillor London.
Thanks, Convener.
Yep.
Convener, can I ask a point of clarification?
Councillor McGowan's on, but if you're very, very quick, Councillor Morgan.
I think the contribution we heard there just crystallises and clarifies why we need clarity in this. Cutting of grass is not a statutory duty. And we could then get ourselves into a situation
where
are cutting grass and we're paying off teachers and social workers.
Councillor Morgan, I don't think we're going to be paying off teachers that way. I think there are statutory numbers we have to have. Okay, Councillor McGowan.
I'd just like to thank Jordan for asking the question PEF, because I was concerned about that, because as far as I'm concerned, PEF is there for head teachers to be able to think out the box and raise attainment by thinking out different projects. But thanks, Leanne, for your answer, and that clarifies it for me. I totally agree with involving local people in decision making. And it was admirable at the last round of PB that so many people were involved in the paper voting exercise. But I think we've got to face the fact that Consul didn't work. People were very excited about voting online, and it really didn't work well. It was the only thing that didn't work. I think I'm totally a supporter of participatory budgeting, but Consul really didn't work. I just want an assurance from Matt that it's been worked on and that it will be seamless at the next round of voting, because it's a very important tool. People live their life online now. Look at us doing Zoom and WebEx and all the social media people are used to using, and we can't have the council using a clunky system that doesn't work. So I really want to see the next time that when people go to vote, it's simple, easy, seamless. So I hope you can give me that assurance, Matt.
Right, Matt, can you respond to that? I think it has all been updated now a bit, but you can, I'm sure, reassure Councillor McGowan.
Certainly. Thanks, Convener. Certainly to say to Councillor McGowan, we were aware of some issues relating to the initial use of the Consul system. We engaged very quickly with with the contacts we have in COSLA. We spoke to them about the issues that pertaining to the system. But we hopefully, we're working to iron out any of those systems within it. We have used Consul a few other times since then for other methods of engagement, and it's worked quite well. But I can assure you, we will be working to carry out tests on this before we do get to the stage where we're going to vote an exercise online. There will be tests carried out, particularly in the areas that we've experienced the problems before. There were some issues about postcodes, there were some issues about people putting in information that had to register, some people didn't have to register. We're going to have to ensure there's a consistency of approach across the whole aspect of that online engagement. So I'll give you assurance here today that we'll certainly do that.
Does that help you, Councillor McGowan?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Don't see anyone else on the chat bar. So do we approve the recommendations? Yeah. Okay, if we can go on to item 11, please. And that is Leanne. Is that correct?
Thanks, Convener, it is. This report provides an update on the process, on the delivery of the process for community asset mapping. Members of this committee some members of this committee will remember that around August time last year, the previous committee that this one replaced approved a process for community asset mapping. This was about working across individual council services and partner agencies to ensure that any community engagement or consultation activity was kind of added to, I suppose, with local knowledge. So anybody who's familiar with or kind of community work practice will be familiar also with asset mapping. It's a well-used approach as for community workers and a number of other professionals, and it's traditionally about getting out there and getting to know what a local community looks like, developing kind of profiles around what that community looks like, what the assets that exist within that community are, and what gaps, I suppose, are as well. What we tried to do here was that we developed a process that broadened that out slightly, and that was really much more about looking at the community assets that existed, both in a physical sense, i.e. what buildings, what areas, what types of activity did local people value, what existed in terms of local assets in terms of the people that are within communities, whether it be individuals, community organisations, local businesses, etc. And we started to kind of map that out in the broadest sense, to look at how we could map that out in the broadest sense possible. The idea was really that we should never really be going into a community cold, and this was about supporting the plan for North Lanarkshire and the key areas of investment that are outlined within the plan for North Lanarkshire programme of work areas, particularly around town and community hubs, some of the parks master planning work, some of the town centre vision or the town visioning work that's underway. I suppose the idea was that if we're going to be engaging in consulting, it's important that we understand what individual communities look like and what assets currently exist within communities and what's going to be important to local people. And that's about us having an understanding of what that community looks like so that we can then target any engagement that's required. So if we already understand what that community looks like and who the key connectors within communities are, etc., we're then able to go in and say, okay, we're going to be engaging around a community hub in this area. There are particular people that we know that we've not necessarily engaged with. There are some gaps in the knowledge that we have about this community, and they would then be able to really target our engagement rather than just going in with that blanket approach and asking the same questions and probably ending up with the same people engaging with us. So it was about being much more targeted. So since the approach was approved last year, our team have been working closely with partners at a locality level and across key services and teams within the council to really focus on the early part of that mapping exercise. It's been particularly around some of the early adopter, what we're terming the early adopter community hub sites. So the community hub work that we know that's going to be happening in the kind of shorter to medium term. So the teams have been working with Charles McCabe and the kind of forward planning team around the town and community hubs to start to look at where we know that there's going to be some investment or where some of the schools were going to be upgraded anyway, and starting to look at what the model for the community hub in particular communities would be. The team have been undertaking some of that earlier mapping and then moving on to a more kind of focused approach to community engagement around the particular proposals where they are available. So it's really a precursor to any kind of investment around the school sites or any kind of solid plans. And it's making sure that the teams across the council understand the importance of that and not just going in cold when it comes to community engagement, that we need to, if we've got background information, we need to use that to inform how we engage with local communities in a way that suits their local needs and builds on the knowledge that we already have. So the community hub sites, we've done a fair bit. Some of them have got very tight timescales, so we haven't been able to go through the full process. So we've had to develop almost a condensed version. Obviously, COVID-19 has put a bit of a dampener on some of the fuller community-led engagement work, and that we would have anticipated being able to go out and do a lot more community workshops and focus groups, and to get community groups to be able to lead on this work. Clearly, a lot of the community groups and organisations have been a lot more focused on the COVID response and recovery, and therefore we've had a limited ability to engage face-to-face. Therefore, a lot of the work's been based on the kind of desktop and starting to collate some of the information that we already have based on previous engagement exercises and some of that remote discussion with communities. The priority moving forward is certainly about starting to get community networks to lead around some of this work, so that when we're developing engagement planning within a particular community, for whether it's in terms of preparing for investment in an area, or whether it's because it's an area that we've highlighted as maybe not being quite as engaged and as needing to develop much more targeted engagement plans, we would certainly want communities to be leading about that. But ultimately, this is about us understanding what our communities look like and doing it in a range of levels. You'll see within the appendices, there's some information there around the process, and also around some updates in terms of progress. I have actually just over the past week got a more updated version of that with a bit more information, so I can certainly circulate the more updated, more detailed version of the progress update appendix to elected members following this meeting. So ultimately, we're just asking you to know the progress that's being made and agree to ongoing progress reports, and assuming that, you know, if things start to improve in terms of your ability to engage with communities face to face and direct, you'll see a much fuller and richer update, but there has been a fair bit of work been undertaken around this work with our team and across other teams within the council, and with our partner agencies at a locality level, and that's me, convener.
Thanks, Leanne, and that's good that you'll forward the updated appendix to the elected members. I think I'll only see Councillor Linden. Councillor Linden.
Thanks very much, Convener. Just a brief question. Firstly, can I say I really welcome the report, Leanne, and I think that there's always been a discourse around the term community capacity building versus our community participation workers, and the notion that our communities already have capacity. It's about activating it, realising it and enhancing it, as opposed to building it. And I think that what's really welcome in particular is the diagram in page 132, that golden thread around recognising that we come from a place of people in our communities having assets themselves, rather than thinking about assets as a physical building. And I think that, you know, that being underpinned in terms of 1.1.1 in the report is really to be welcomed, and really refocuses the discourse on assets in our community not being just physical, but looking at them as being in the community. It's on that theme that my question is really, and it's about recognising the scale of the challenge, and that assets physical are easy to map, assets not physical within the community are perhaps more challenging to map. And I guess that whilst the community are the golden thread in that regard, how are we going to articulate to our community and with our community the fact that they are assets, we have assets within the community by way of people. You know, I noticed that in the action in Appendix 1 that we'll outline through a leaflet or a pamphlet, you know, the physical assets on a map, and we're using GIS and having it colour coded. With people in a community, you can't do that. It's challenging, it's very difficult. How do you then consider how we map local people's assets, and how do we articulate that not only back to their own community, but right across North Lanarkshire?
Leanne, can you answer Councillor Linden, please?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think the realistic answer is that we'll do that in a number of ways, dependent on a particular community. I don't think there is necessarily a one size fits all. I think, you know, if we go into work in communities, sometimes there are very active community groups that already exist, or there are clear individuals within a community that can help us to reach out and help us to understand what those assets look like. And that's the starting point, I think, for dialogue. I think a lot of it is to do with the terminology and the words that we use. Obviously, we talk about community asset mapping here as a community empowerment committee, and officers that are familiar with that term. I think it's really just about understanding your community. So I think we need to look at some of the terminology around that. Before COVID-19, and we all kind of get swept away with that, and it does sound like I suppose I'm referring back to that quite a lot, but that's the reality for this particular piece of work, was that we did have a number of kind of briefing sessions planned for some of the kind of key community anchor organisations, some of our community planning partners, some of the services across the council, to really help them to understand what we meant by this process, and what their role was in support and delivery of that. We had to kind of review and postpone that and shift our focus slightly for a number of reasons, and I think we probably do need to now revisit that to make sure that there is a clear understanding. But I think it might be that in some areas, what my hope would be that dependent on the area, would be that this approach would be very much led by the community. So therefore it should be reflecting what local people think, and how we then connect out or reach out into the wider community to help them to understand the assets that exist. And I don't think that there can be a one size fits all. I think we can put all the frameworks that we want in place, but I think ultimately this is about us saying, let's look at this community and let's start from what we already know. So if we know there are existing networks or influential people or people who know a community, the starting point is dialogue with them to say, how would we get this message out across your community? How would we get local people to understand that they are an asset, and how do we work with them to build upon that? I hope that answers the question, and I'm sorry it's not a specific answer, but I think it really is an approach, and I think I do accept that it could be a large task, and that's why we're trying to we would love to do this just across North Lanarkshire and say each of the 9 boards, we've got a really clear community asset mapping process that's been completed, and I think that's what we'll be working towards, building that up. But ultimately we need to prioritise, and if prioritize around what we know is going to be happening in a community and who we know we need to be speaking to make sure that engagement is very targeted. We're just concerned that we don't want other services and teams to just kind of jump, and they won't, because we're in dialogue with them, but what we don't want is maybe happened previously where people have just went in and said, we're doing a consultation in this community, we want to ask this series of questions, and there's that kind of consultation fatigue at times where people are saying, well, we've already spoken to that service. This is about better connecting that up and saying, what do we already know, what already exists, and what's the best way for us reaching out to this community to assist them to be able to inform the decisions that are going to be taking place or going to be taken that affect their community in the immediate or kind of medium term future.
Thanks, Leanne. Is that okay, Councillor London?
Just a brief supplementary, if you don't mind, Convener, because I recognise it's a very challenging question. How do you map the population and the assets that they bring to the table? Just in terms of the very practical, around the 9 localities and engaging with them and to avoid duplication in that mapping exercise. Is there work ongoing as part of this exercise with NLPB and the community voluntary sector to jointly do this mapping exercise of community assets to avoid any duplication of any other potential exercise they may be undertaken to ensure there's a joint up community planning partners approach to that asset mapping exercise?
Leanne, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair bit of work that we're undertaking. I think Matt kind of referred to earlier on, looking at the North Lanarkshire Strategic Leadership Group and their programme of work and the particular priorities they've highlighted at a leadership level and around community planning. And there's one of their priorities is around community empowerment and supporting communities. And what we are doing right now is starting to look at what the kind of tracking and performance framework around that is. And what I can say is that embedded with, so there's a number of key actions and areas of focus that sit within that very broad head, and the community asset mapping sits within that as part of the wider engagement framework, because I think it's important to recognise that this mapping doesn't sit alone, and I think I've probably said that a million times there. It's a precursor to ongoing wider community engagement and very targeted community engagement, and it goes back to the points that were raised earlier also around how do we make sure any decision making or discussion through the community boards reflects the wider community engagement process or reflects the wider community. And I suppose what we've got here is a particular focus on wider community engagement that's makes sure that when anything does get discussed at the board, and this community asset mapping process is absolutely a key part of this, if anything is discussed at the community boards, we're able to present the discussion points to the community boards with a load of information that we have from wider engagement activity with those who are most affected by the discussion or the proposal or whatever it is that we're taking to the boards. So we've got that firmly embedded within the programme of work for the North Lanarkshire Partnership Strategic Leadership Group, just to make sure, and also at a locality level, this approach is very much delivered with partners or local community planning partners at that locality level also.
Okay, Councillor London. Okay, do we approve the recommendations? Yep. Okay, if we can go on to item 12. Final item, and is it Graham Proudfoot who's doing this, Lisanne?
So, Andrew, do you want to come in? Sorry, I cut across you there.
So I was just about to say, Kabir, this is a standard report that goes to committees. We don't generally have an officer present.
Don't have an officer too. Okay, that's fine. If you've looked at the contracts awarded, do we note the recommendations then?
Agreed.
Agreed. Can I thank you all? That must be our quickest ever meeting. And some excellent reports there, and the challenges that have been faced by many of the officers during these last few months. So thanks to all again, and have a lovely day, since it's finally dried up at the minute. Okay.
Thanks
Nice
to the
seeing you all
chair.
again.
Thanks to the officer.
Bye-bye.